The Timberwolves needing a point guard is the NBA's worst kept secret, and it does feel like this is getting more and more desperate for Minnesota as the season wears on. Now, they haven't been very good all season, but their recent 3-game losing skid has been a fascinating case study into why it's not quite as simple as just getting a run-of-the-mill point guard and then calling it a day. The main reason for that is because, like literally every good team, their best player is going to have the ball more than anybody else. Anthony Edwards was always this team's lead guard, and now he's actually their point guard, and again, in these 3 losses, he's done a mountain of point guard work. I don't think Ant has ever been as good at using his gravity against these defensive walls that teams are setting up for him to find his teammates and generate good shots as he is right now. And to me, that's the role of any point guard. Obviously, Anthony Edwards is not a traditional point guard and won't ever be one, and don't get me wrong, I'm not here saying Minnesota don't need a point guard, but this is the most important part of this discussion. There's legitimately dozens of examples of Edwards bending the defense and making the right passing read in these 3 games alone, and that's to go along with multiple 40-point games and a 30-piece against what might be the best defense of all time. Whether it's a point guard, a lead guard, a ball handling shooting guard, or any label you want to put on him, coming off a ball screen, beating the coverage, reading all of these bodies in his path, and still finding the paint so they can find the corner is objectively good offense. Ant has been doing that over and over again in these games. Because teams are so willing to throw multiple defenders at him to get the ball out of his hands, these release valves are always unlocked. It's easy to forget about the pass that cracked open all of this backside passing in advantageous positions. The main problem I would say on this roster right now though, is that these plays being made by his teammates after he tilts the defense are the exception, not the rule. This is where a point guard or any creation upgrade that Minnesota can get is required for this team. Teams are so willing to throw this double at him with multiple defenders sagging off behind that because nobody attacks this closeout and keeps the defense in rotation consistently, so it's always back to Ant to plow his way through those defensive walls and try to create something for his team. There's a point guard problem here in Minnesota, that's blatantly obvious, but their biggest issue is that nobody can create or playmate off Ant's gravity at a consistent level, and that dulls the impact he's having as their fill-in point guard right now. In an ideal world, the player next to Anthony Edwards in the backcourt would either be willing to shoot this 3, which DiVincenzo strangely isn't way too often, attack the closeout to get to the paint, or be the one in the corner who reliably makes this shot. Minnesota just does not have that player on the roster right now, and that's the biggest upgrade they need to make. Again, when SGA is standing under the rim off his man and Edwards manages to find that man, his backcourt running mate needs to see this uncontrolled closeout and attack it into the space behind. Now, Ant isn't a perfect point guard option by any means, and he's had his hand in these losses with some funky decisions late in games, but I'd argue all 3 of these games are won before the final moment meltdowns if this team was one who was built to capitalize on his heliocentric growth. Whether it's a point guard or another shot creator type of player, Minnesota need to find more guys who can keep the flow going when Ant bends defenses like this. Because it happens constantly throughout games, and Minnesota take advantage of it at a shockingly low frequency. And that's just the first part of the issue for Minnesota. There's still a legit point guard issue in a traditional sense as well, because whenever it's a possession that Anthony Edwards isn't on the ball, it's even worse. I think this sequence kinda sums up the way Father Time is pummeling Mike Conley right now. He flows into an empty side pick and roll with Gobert, and this defender can just park himself in the paint because Conley is shooting 23% on his drives this season, and that floater has just completely left him at this point. On the other end, he's trying to deny the ball and gets done backdoor. Again, he's just struggling badly to keep up with these younger players, especially against a team like OKC, and because he's unable to create for himself with the ball, he picks up his dribble and almost turns it over just a few steps over the timeline. Conley is still a very reliable three-point shooter, but his inability to operate as a creator is really murdering these non-Edwards point guard possessions. When this hypothetical new Minnesota point guard gets the switch on the pick and roll in clutch time, he's gotta be able to turn this corner, or at least avoid picking up his dribble and putting a handbrake on the possession, especially when Edwards is on the court and not getting a touch of the ball. And you can cycle through all of the Minnesota point guard options, and all of it's just kinda bad. Unlike how Edwards is trending up when navigating traffic, Julius Randle is trending down. His initiator possessions are becoming super slow, super predictable, and more erratic as his unsustainably hot start as a scorer starts to cool off, and you can feel the lack of a point guard the most on the possessions where he is the designated captain of the offense. This possession kind of encapsulates that pretty well, I think. First possession of overtime, Conley can't get downhill off the horns action, Randle both refuses to take the three or find Edwards coming off the counter action pin down, and it devolves into a sloppy post up that was never going to work against a stacked defense. So Conley's not able to do it anymore, Randle is super volatile and more of a scorer than someone you can really rely on to be a full-time playmaker. Dante DiVincenzo is a shooter who is a walking turnover if he's asked to dribble the ball, and Rob Dillingham is young, chaotic, and not trusted by the coach whatsoever. And now you can see where Minnesota is really feeling the absence of a real point guard. Again, they win all three of these games if they just had a player next to Edwards who could actually capitalize consistently off his point guard possessions, and they win these three games if they have someone who can carry the load for the offense when Edwards isn't in that role. It really does feel like the ceiling on this team is capped until they find a solution to all of those problems. If you want to see less minutes with no point guards and more breakdowns like this one, hit subscribe and drop a like or a comment below. And if you want more of Howls and Growls, check out the Worldwide Wolves podcast on YouTube and everywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for watching.